And what I found was a culture that was very receptive to ideas around efficiency, around building efficiency and finding opportunities to make things work better. I think it's important to always invest in the talent, invest in their development, invest in their promotion, not necessarily their getting promoted, but like the promotion of them and their talent. Think of it as a musician who, would study all their scales and would need to learn theory.
Yes.
But when they improvise, they're not thinking about the scales. They're not thinking about the theory.
Done it a million times, and it's just second nature.
You're flowing.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back. So today we're going to slow down the pace just a little bit, sort of in a still waters run deep kind of way. Today's guest is Joe Lamb. Joe's a creative operations leader and innovator I've had the pleasure to work with for almost 15 years now, on and off. Throughout that time, Joe has remained one of the most curious and conscientious leaders I've ever worked with inside or outside the creative operations world. Starting his career as a photographer, Joe quickly found his calling in exploring and developing efficient systems and tools that allow creative professionals and creative leaders to really see and understand the intricacies of an individual studio or a global studio network. He has this innate ability to communicate large, complex ideas with a simplicity that, without changing a syllable, conveys the essence of the matter to either an entry-level contributor or a prickly member of the C-suite. But what always gets me excited about spending time with Joe Lamb is that I know I'm going to learn something very valuable. Whether on a studio production floor or around a conference room table, Joe consistently brings a perspective and insight that no one at the table has even considered, but that always improves and expands the understanding of any situation. And on the flip side of that, what I've always noticed is his appreciation and respect for his teams, the talented folks that Joe brings into creative operations organizations not to only execute, but advance a studio or an organization's imaging capabilities. So with that said, let's get started. Joe Lamb, welcome.
Hi, Tony.
It's so good to have you.
It's good to be here.
Yeah. The one thing I always tell people about you is one of the smartest people I know in the industry of creative operations. And the evidence of that most recently, I should say, is at Nike. We were all around a conference room table. I was there as a contracted, coming in as potential new leadership. And we were having a series of really in-depth conversations about building a studio in a section of the world where it's really difficult to build anything. And during those conversations, what I experienced was what I often experience with you is you're very quiet, you're very stoic. You sit there and let people sort of talk about their plans and their fears. And then suddenly Joe Lamb speaks and is the voice of reason, not only talking about the likely way that this will move forward, but also 2 or 3 other points of reference that we're not considering, which either lead to other conversations about how they should be considered or how that we're actually in a good point because of those other things that we're not taking into account, that puts the organization in a really good spot. So I'm dying to know, though I don't know how to ask, like how you cultivated that sort of very stoic, very patient with everyone around you in these environments.
That's a good question. Tony, thank you for the kind words and that's high praise coming from somebody like you. But I wish I could point at any particular work that I put in to learn the behavior that I think that you're describing. It maybe just comes through life experiences and having been at least in that sort of room where we're talking about building studios, having the opportunity to have been in so many of those rooms over the years. That it's an opportunity to kind of let folks kind of air what's important to them and what what the goals are, and then what I can add to the situation is just that benefit of experience and the benefit of having been through it a number of times to help either settle any anxieties that folks might have in the room about the project or potentially share things that we've tried in the past or things that we thought of in the past to help accelerate wherever we happen to be in the process during that conversation.
Yeah, because with creative operations and building out studios, building out platforms and situations to scale, you do often run into the same scenarios, the same challenges, yet at the same time, things are evolving so quickly.
Yeah.
whether it be technology or expectations from the stakeholders, things like that. That wisdom, which I hope that we'll talk about a little bit during this conversation, the wisdom needs to shift within creative operations because the landscape itself is shifting on a global level.
Right. Right. And those are going to be challenges that we're all going to have to try to figure out together. How do we evolve, against the backdrop of whether it's economic or political or consumer behavior, whatever it is, we're going to have to be thinking about like how do we, change the ways that we work or adapt the ways that we work.
React to things that have come
support
up.
that, and also how can we be thinking about ourselves, our own personal ways of working, our own toolkits, and thinking about how are we prepared to take on those challenges, in the future, or are we kind of set in in doing things in a certain way that we've always done them.
Yeah, and creative operations, like I said, like we've just said, it evolves so quickly and in so many different ways. But one of the things that you've been really consistent about, and I want to dig into this in a little bit, but set the stage for everybody, is this: you have consistently talked about the culture of innovation when it comes to creative operations at scale, and we've both worked at potentially the largest scale there really is in that arena. I guess this is a good lead into how you and I first met. I think it was back in 2012, 2013, when Amazon decided to get into the fashion world, and you were part of the team that was the tip of the spear in Brooklyn, in Williamsburg, building out literally with construction a 50,000 square foot, 28 bay, 2 editorial studio, mega studio.
Yeah, and I remember that one of the first days that we worked together, when we just like took the subway into New York, went to B&H, and we were like picking up like cables and stuff, and like keyboards and like a bunch of peripherals that we were just missing, so we could get ready to turn on the studio. Like, I don't know if you remember, like we come out of there with like bags of junk and just like ready to like go back, like just like
jump back on the L train and hopefully get back in time.
Exactly.
So that's been a long time, and at the time, it was what I understood is that was the world's largest on-body apparel studio. So we were, as far as products go, this is from memory, as far as products go, we were pushing through at least 150,000 SKUs a year, which...
It was a busy place. I mean, as far as we knew, I don't know that there was ever a database of like the biggest studios in the world, or, who would have that, who would be able to account for that record. But certainly to us, it was the biggest one that any of us had seen. And, a lot of the talent and the crews that we were bringing in were saying that it was like a scale that they really hadn't experienced before.
It was something else. So this, when you begin to talk about that culture of innovation, you need that to figure a lot of that stuff out. But
and indeed, like Amazon is famous for having a culture of innovation, like with a capital I. The business operates in that mode of, and thrives on building that culture within all of their teams.
That's right.
And that can show up in different ways, and in some ways it can show up in a very positive way, and it can have you can present challenges to an organization as well. I think what the trick is for us in creative ops, or in photography, or in design, and any kind of creative discipline, is finding ways to build that culture, or create the spaces for our people to innovate and to be creative, and to improve their ways of working, improve their own personal toolkits, without maybe some of the really heavy-handed things that come along with like a quote-unquote culture of innovation that would within a technology organization. So I think just at the beginning, I'd want to separate like what you might hear about, like when a CEO at a large technology company talks about a culture of innovation, and then what we might be talking about. It's not one-on-one the same thing. Maybe taking parts that are working well from some of those disciplines, from some of those management books, but then kind of picking and choosing what can we integrate into the creative space.
Yes.
To basically keep our people, keep our teammates, keep the folks that we're leading, able to operate with that with that spark.
Yeah, because it's a culture shock. What I often talk about, people want to know the difference between, say, a freelance creative. We're used to hiring photographers and stylists and designers and certainly other parts of our team, copywriters. And you go from this point of being a freelance person and you're begging people, what feels like begging people for work to do the thing that you love to do. And you, from the outside, you say, oh, creative operations, get into the studio. I'll just get to do that all the time. But once you cross over, and you and I have done this, I don't know, dozens, if not hundreds of times, hired freelancers to come into a corporate creative world. And suddenly the challenge of getting work is gone.
Yeah.
But there are all these other challenges that that they didn't expect, or maybe as leadership we could have prepared them for more easily. And I say all that getting back to maybe how you started, because when I met you, you had been at Amazon for a little while in one of the studio complexes in the Midwest.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear sort of how you got into it, and if any of that maybe applies.
Sure. Well, I started out as a photographer. So my background's in photography, my background's in fine art, and I was working in Cincinnati back in the day, mostly embedded in collaborating with artists in the city. So I was working at a gallery called Publico as a kind of in-house photographer, and I would participate in all these art happenings that were happening in the gallery. And all the shows that were happening at the gallery, and we had sculptors, and we had printmakers, and we had musicians, and we had poetry readings. We had all sorts of events that were happening there. And so my role was to document for several years everything that went on there. All of the artists and all the artwork that was happening. While I was.
And how old are you when you're doing all this?
I was in my early 20s.
Okay.
Yeah. It was right after college, and. At that time, I was also freelancing. I was assisting. I was working with, commercial photographers and regionally, and I was just trying to kind of find my path, in a sense. But kind of coming out of it as, from the position of an artist, as with the mind of an artist. And I was working in the studio, making my own installations, producing my own artworks. And, along the way, did figure out that I did, enjoy making a living. I wanted to find ways to make a living.
Right.
And so I had to find some way to kind of combine the things that I really enjoyed doing in photography and videography and art making and creative problem solving. And so I was not specifically looking for an opportunity at Amazon. But when the opportunity came around, I jumped at it. So I had an opportunity to, through a friend, heard there was an opening for a staff photographer role.
Okay.
In their product photo studio.
Yeah.
And so applied and interviewed.
And that was just over the river in Hebron, Kentucky.
Right. So near the airport in CVG, or the Cincinnati airport.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Amazon had their fulfillment centers. There.
That's right.
Fulfillment centers are the warehouses where all the products are brought, organized, and then when you place an order, they get fulfilled or
there are hundreds of
sent back
the
to the customers from there. At the time, Amazon had all of their footwear and accessories, like sunglasses and watches and really shoes, were all going to this one warehouse. And so we had a photo studio there in the CVG
And that
facility.
was CVG. And if I'm not mistaken, that was that massive shoe rack. Like I'm pretty sure to this day that was the largest single machine I've ever seen. From what I remember, it was the size of a football field, and it was where all the shoes were organized, and it was on a conveyor belt.
Multiple football fields.
I mean, it was
Gigantic
multiple stories high.
building,
It was incredible.
Yeah, and so, my first job, my first professional commercial photography full-time job was to photograph shoes for Amazon, for a company called Endless.com. And it was a never-ending supply of shoes. I'd look out the studio and there was, there would be 500 shoes on racks getting styled and prepped, ready for tomorrow for the five of us, the five photographers who were going to be shooting those shoes. And we were all expected to do 50 or 100 per day.
Right. Multiple
And then
angles.
I'd look outside the studio, just outside the door, and there'd be shelving, and there would be hundreds and hundreds of more shoes. And so we'd get through our 500, and then the next day there's 500 more, and the next day there's 500 more, and lo and behold, there's still 2,000 outside the door.
Right.
And, at that point, it was really a 360 or a 180 from what I had been doing before I joined, right? Because I'd been working I'd been working with artists.
Yeah.
I had been working on building photographic installations. I was, working to tell a story or to communicate ideas in a different kind of way, and solving different challenges. There was an instance at the gallery where we were working with an artist, a guy named David Ellis, who was doing kinetic installations, and we were building this kinetic installation, this giant bird, and it was made of glass bottles.
Oh my God!
And it had it made noise. So we were working with our friend Roberto, who was running a composition, and that this bird would go up and down, and it would make pings, and it would make a beat. And so, we were working on these really kind of technical challenges, but they were really intricate thing, and really no one knew how. There's no blueprint on how to build a giant bird that goes up and down and makes a beat.
Right.
But those are the kinds of things I was doing. And then a year later, I'm sitting in a warehouse in Kentucky, and I'm trying to figure out how to shoot hundreds of shoes every day.
Right.
So it's a big shift. So nevertheless, there was challenges in that work that I found intensely interesting. Because it was the scale problem. It's the repeatability problem. Really briefly, when I was in school, I was in a printmaking class doing woodblock prints, intaglio prints, screen prints, and we had a visiting artist come through. It was this Japanese artist, and he did woodblock prints, and he set up his station in a very clean and organized way, so that he had his blocks, he had his paper, he had his ink, he had his rollers, and he was ready to go. And he could do additions. And so he could do addition prints in the most efficient way. So he wasn't reaching or going to other sides of the shop to get all the tools he needed. He had all the tools he needed right there and all of his supplies. And they were organized in a way that he could, really efficiently grab the paper, place it on the block, do his burnish, move on to the next one. You could move through an addition again very efficiently. So I was able to take that experience, at the time made a lot of sense to me. And I thought, well, that kind of thing can apply here.
And it wasn't there. You weren't experiencing it there, or there was room for improvement.
Well, right. And what I found was a culture that was very receptive to ideas around efficiency, around building efficiency and finding opportunities to make things work better. Yeah. So.
Because again, there's a never-ending line of shoes, and that's just this studio. That's one of many studios.
And so, just at that moment, we're thinking about what are the small things I can do to make my day more efficient. Yeah. One of the very first things I thought was we had racks, these baker's racks of shoes, and they would get loaded up from the floor all the way to the top. Okay. And so I'd find myself reaching down to the floor, coming all the way back up to this set. Yeah. And there's all this reaching and bending. And so they're just very simple, low-tech thing was to get all the stylists to stop putting stuff on the bottom rack. And that we stopped with all the bending. Yeah. And so we were able to increase our productivity by 5 or 10%. Right. Just by doing that simple thing. We didn't need any new technology. We didn't need to make big investments. It was just what are those small things that I can do to simplify my work? And so that was kind of the link between the printmaker, the footwear photography, small, being able to think about small things. And we started to think about 5S. So if you think about 5S,
explain what that is.
It's a Japanese inspired
Oh, is it Japanese?
process.
Okay.
It comes out of the Kaizen work, comes out of the,
Yeah.
There's a really wonky kind of like operational text called the Toyota Way.
Yes.
And it's something we used at Amazon really heavily.
Well, wasn't it mandatory reading?
It was mandatory reading for a lot of folks. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the concepts in them, again,
spot on.
you could take all of them and you could go build a fulfillment center, or you could take maybe 10% of it and you could apply it to your creative operation.
Yeah. And do you remember what the 5S are? Oh, I should remember that. It's been drilled into me.
Straighten, standardize, shine. I don't know. I don't want to say.
Right.
Cut that part out.
But it's it's a lot. Yeah, we should know that after all those years.
Yeah. Well, but I think it's one of these things like where you kind of learn the concept and you have it, you have the mindset of continuous improvement. You have the mindset of innovation. Once it's part of your daily work, you don't worry about all the pneumatic devices. You don't worry about all the rules. Think of it as a musician who, would study all their scales and would need to learn theory.
Yes.
But when they improvise, they're not thinking about
the
scales. They're not thinking about the theory.
Done it a million times, and it's just second nature.
You're flowing.
Yes. Thank you for bringing that word up.
So I think that kind of goes back to what you the intro. You're talking about like, how did you learn to do this in the conference room, or how did you learn to handle in the situation? It's at that point, it's kind of the flow that comes through like years of working through these
just experiences
and
wisdom. And one of the themes that keeps coming up in a lot of these conversations is this, the word wisdom, right? And the thing that I talk about a lot is that, as far as I can tell, or certainly what I talk about, is the foundation, the absolute foundation for wisdom. For me, is just simple pattern recognition. I've seen this before, and then you can begin to put the appropriate things on top of that foundation of, well, I have tried this and it worked, or it didn't work, or we have not tried this and it sure makes sense, or this worked over here for this. Why don't we try some form of it over here? And there's no, certainly when you talk about creative operations, there's no shortage of opportunities to become wiser. Because one of the things I remember about our time in the JFK studio in Williamsburg is, there it was a never-ending rack of clothes, just hundreds and thousands of garments, pieces of apparel that needed to be photographed. And certainly once we got the studio up and running, and there was on the good days there was a rhythm, right? On the really good days there was a flow, and because it was a never-ending stream of projects, really individual projects, hundreds and thousands, what we could do is we could try things. We could begin to innovate things, because if we knew it wasn't quite, like we were doing well already with these small tweaks, like, okay, that didn't work as well as we thought. We're just going to try the next thing tomorrow. And it was constant. It was a constant, it was part of the culture. You were always looking for, it wasn't necessarily the easy way to do things, although oftentimes it did make it easier. But there, we were certainly looking for quality along with quantity.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm really proud of at JFK, at that Williamsburg Amazon studio, is for a lot of things, that team there that we were able to build sort of became the gold standard for a lot of the global studios that Amazon would go on to build. And we could apply the things not only to the on-body images that we were creating, but it did translate over to, okay, this type of still life, and jewelry and watches here, and footwear here, and other things. And it was this really lovely period for me, although intense. It was always something new. You were always getting to problem solve. You were always, whether it felt like it or not, you were actually getting smarter.
Yeah.
You were getting hopefully wiser along the way.
Yeah. We had with the benefits of so much volume, and repeatability, you're kind of learning. You're kind of forced to learn what works well.
Yeah.
And eventually you build a standardized mechanisms and standardized processes that can be like picked up and put down, over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And that repeatability really,
yeah.
Really took hold. And I guess that's kind of that. And therein lies some of the problem, for the staff photographer, for the staff stylist, for the teams that are for the full-time folks. And if we come back up as leaders, we think about like, well, how do we do well by them, and how do we, how do we harness their creativity, their spirit of innovation, provide pathways for that to flourish for those individuals, and for those teams, so they can have a rounded experience, and B, the things that they can, as they grow and as they develop, they can, we can have those skills and those lessons reinvested in our organization, in our process.
Yeah, it was the place where I learned what true leadership was, and what the difference between sort of management and leadership was, and there's a big difference in between that, and keeping a group of both freelance and full-time creative, what we refer to as creative contributors, focused, all moving in the same direction at the same pace. It truly does take leadership, because I think as a creative person, I mean, I feel this way, I'm sure to a degree you feel this way, is you want this sense of autonomy to discover what is actually beautiful, what is worthy about this that I'm actually putting my energy into. And, hopefully at the studios we've worked at, we've been able to give those creative folks more focus. And one of the things that I was really proud of there, the leadership team that we had at that studio was, we came into New York and we were gonna land and shake up the world there. But as soon as we started approaching people, for me it was fashion photographers. For you, I think it was a lot of the digital techs at the time, and again, it was a saturated market, and people sort of scoffed and rolled their eyes, and not a lot of negative reactions to Amazon. I think there was some bad press about Amazon at the time, and but what we were able to build there was a place that it was so genuine in the pursuit of quality at scale that I refer to it as we developed our own gravity. Pretty soon, within 6 months, those people that had scoffed at us, that had turned away and rolled their eyes, they were knocking on the door to come work, because we had created such a culture there where, more days than not, people bop in the front door, they're seeing people that they really like seeing, or maybe they haven't seen in a long time. Yeah. They hop over, they get a great cup of coffee, they know where they're going.
Yeah, I mean, for freelancers, it's great.
It's great.
Because there's a steady stream of work.
True.
And there's, hundreds of bookable days a month. Every month we were booking however many days of photographers.
Yeah.
It wasn't 30 days times 20. It was 150 days of bookings for photographers.
Yeah, I think on average, our average was running like 12 days a day, 12, 15 days a day. And at least in the beginning, before I think that got trimmed back later on. But just to have people come in and say, oh, okay, so it's not this normal, what I think was certainly viewed as drudgery, kind of this shooting fashion on white.
But I think it does become that for a lot of folks if they're doing it day in, day out.
If they're doing it day in and day out.
Yeah.
Probably so.
Because I think the thing that works well for the freelancer is they have their own practice, and they have their studio, and they have other clients, and they're working and they're doing different things. When you have the staff photographers, the staff digitechs, the staff stylists, and they're executing the same style guides day in, day out, day in, day out.
Yeah.
It's like how do you as a leader create the space for them to feel like they're getting some of what you would do if you were running your own studio or if you were running your own business.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, you've managed multiple teams, right? As I said, when we first started, you were managing certainly the digitechs, and not only that, I think there were some maybe equipment managers and things in there. Certainly, the people that are foundational to an operation like that running smoothly. You've also gone on to manage so many other types of people and talents. But is there one thread that sort of runs through your sense of or your style of leadership that you found to be really successful?
Yeah. I think it's important to always invest in the talent, invest in their development, invest in their promotion, not necessarily getting promoted, but like the promotion of them and their talent to other folks within the organization. Right. So,
I mean, maybe the crass way of saying is, as the leader, not taking all the credit, like making sure that people know the name of the people that are doing it.
So they know who they are, but they also know what they're capable of. And it may not just be the one thing that they're known for doing every day, but they may have skills and they have talents that go beyond what their role appears to be, or what the perception of their role is, day in, day out. Again, an example of like the e-commerce photographer role. If you're photographing models on white backgrounds, or shoes on white backgrounds, or watches, or whatever, you're doing that and likely executing against a style guide.
Yes.
So lighting that's defined, angles that are defined. The only variable is the product that gets placed in front of you, or the it's a little bit more with models, a little more interesting because you have personalities. But the challenge for the photographer, becomes the discipline. In that sense. But the reward becomes, I think, less. It's harder for them to define because they're not going to be facing as many tough challenges or new challenges. Throughout the weeks and months, the years that they're executing against that style guide. So,
well, it's interesting you bring that up because, and having started in the fine art world, oftentimes what folks talk about the difference between, say, a commercial artist, commercial photographer, and a fine art artist or photographer is, the commercial photographer, and I'm drastically painting with a broad brush here, but the commercial photographer needs to create that one iconic image and then be known for creating these separate iconic images and developing a rhythm for that and becoming known for that. Whereas a fine artist, it's really like that. The individual things are important, but it's also the body of work that is looked at much more, other than for the commercial photographer, portfolio review, say. I think that's what it becomes for a creative operations organization is, the stakeholders are looking at a body of work and they have certain deliverables, whether it be budget or quantity or, the things that are important to those individual stakeholders. And I don't know, I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, you bring up a good point about the stakeholders and the customers, right? The studio, any studio is going to have customers, whether you're an agency or you're an in-house production unit. And I think in the case of the in-house production unit, where you have one or two or maybe three primary customers, whether they be different brands within an organization or maybe different product lines within an organization.
Or an agency will have multiple clients.
But an agency may have many clients, and they may be changing with more frequency. In any case, your staff photographers, your staff creatives are day in, day out working to fulfill the requests for those few clients to produce that long tail body of work, the PDP.
Yes.
Right?
And
again, I think it's important to make sure that there's space in the budget, in the days, in the time that we for those folks, so that they're able to work on other things.
So talk.
So they're able to work on expanding their skills. That they're expanding their aptitude and awareness of other technologies, of other equipment that's not being put to play in the day-to-day execution of the PDP and the style guide. So that they are ready to solve other kinds of challenges that are unknown.
Do you have some success stories about that? I mean, I know you do. I'm just curious what comes to mind.
For sure. One of the things I always try to do in my studios is make sure that there are days off task or offset for anybody who's staff, right? Where they can work on research and development projects, not just as free time, not just as kind of like
actual
unsupervised, but as actual kind of R&D projects, that are defined. that gives the team the opportunity to learn about new tools, to learn how to, or to work on creative problem solving in a way that they're not working on, to execute the daily style guide. As an example, in one of my most recent studios, we were challenged to think about how to produce live production for our studios. We didn't have a brief, or we didn't have any volume to produce the live production.
So you mean content that is being streamed out when you say live production?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, so like live streaming, like a podcast.
Okay. En masse.
Yeah.
At scale.
At scale.
Yeah.
Right. And so our team was not familiar with the tools.
Right.
They weren't familiar with the process.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to carve out time, carve out budget, carve out space for the team to go and learn some of that capability and we brought in some experts and they got to work with them. All to say that the team, I think, would have been less effective if they didn't regularly have the opportunity to be thinking about, like, what are some alternative ways of doing production than what we do today.
Yeah.
Like, what are doing research on, what are some post-production processes?
Mm-hmm.
What are some different cameras that are coming on the market? What are some different lightings that's coming on the market?
Pay actual attention.
What is some different grip that's coming on the market? Or what are other people doing in the industry? Another example is, like, virtual production volumes were coming online, like, as we were starting to learn about, using
using certain technologies.
To do, that was born out of, like, the gaming industry, using Unreal Engine to build environments and worlds, right?
Wow.
We didn't have a specific application for that in our studio, but we were getting requests, for and a kind of ever-changing set of briefs. And we could see what was happening in the industry, and we could see what technology was available and what was being done at a high level in advertising, high level in marketing. And it stood to reason that those types of requests would eventually make their way to the studio. Yeah. And we wanted to build up some level of aptitude or some level of skill in that world so that when those requests come, we're ready to serve them.
Right.
So rather than having the team kind of day in, day out, 360, 2,000 hours a year or whatever.
Right.
Working heads down on the PDP brief. We want to make sure that there's time away from that so they can be thinking about, like, what might be coming down the pike.
Yeah.
What new technologies are coming.
Yeah.
What new types of content are out there in the marketplace. And how are we going to serve those, how are we going to serve those requests from our business partners down the line when they do come?
Yeah. I'm smiling because it just brings back a lot of memories about, this is coming down, and being able to read the tea leaves a little bit and saying, can we go check this out over here, or pull people off, get permission to do that.
I think one of the pitfalls that studios run into, especially in-house studios, is they get a reputation of kind of being a one-trick pony.
Okay.
They're the team that does that one thing. They do the PDP. And the PDP is stale because the PDP hasn't changed for 3 years.
Right.
The lighting's the same. Nobody's really the casting is the same, and the photography is degraded or whatever.
Yeah.
It's
just sort of a slow ramp down as people get used to it.
Perception
is true. That's very true.
Drifted.
Yeah.
Or maybe the quality of the PDP is the same, but the world around it has continued to evolve, and smaller companies or other creators out in the world are disrupting the marketplace, right? And
the public gets used to seeing that,
and your business partners get used to seeing that.
Yes.
And their expectations are that things will change in their studio, or that you'll be able to serve them at a different level or with a different set of capabilities. Again, I think it's critical then to invest continuously in your teams so that they're ready to meet those challenges. They're thinking about how to push the envelope creatively, push the envelope, technically, in their process, in
Yeah.
their in the studio as it is, and not wait for somebody else to come and disrupt them.
Yeah.
You know,
Yes.
not wait for somebody to come up with a request for something. You know, if they already had ideas, if maybe they're holding on to those ideas.
Mm.
You know, how am I going to showcase macro videography of my products, or if I did a process with like robotic arms or something like that. Ultimately important for leaders to be thinking about how their teams can continue to push the envelope in their own creative and technical expertise. How can they, you know, be invested in developing new capabilities for the studio to serve future needs for your
clients,
for your
and
clients and
stakeholders business
stakeholders.
partners.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I know that to advance that, you know, it's hard for organizations, really large organizations, to get behind this sometimes because they're dealing with a lot, and oftentimes the content studios are just seen as cost centers. And I know that you and I have talked a lot about it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a valid problem that a lot of studios face, and they are set up that way. You know, where the image for the PDP, the video, or the piece of copy or whatever is a cost of goods sold. You know, but the studio itself, the talent that sits within the studio, the investments that have gone into creating the facility.
Yes.
You know, all those things together, and the technology investments that have gone into it, can come together to create so much more than, you know, just that baseline content that's a part of that cost of goods sold.
Yeah. So more than just the sum of its parts.
Right. And with the right care and feeding, the studios, those teams can deliver a product or can deliver services that expand beyond that of a cost center. But they can be contributing to as a growth driver for a business by, you know, delivering a wider array of content, a higher quality of content, and contributing further up the funnel from the PDP that they were initially, you know, set up to support.
Yeah. So one of the challenges that I've often run into is, you know, just this communication, maybe even a connection between the studio, its leadership, and the leadership of the other teams that are acting as their, you know, internal clients. If you're with an agency, the actual client that you're delivering for. And, you know, I think there are a number of ways you can approach kind of building that trust so that you can grow. But, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? How do you present those new capabilities to your stakeholders when oftentimes that is all you're seen as is sort of a one-trick cost center?
Yeah. It's a challenge. I think it's a challenge of leaders to build the relationships with their partners across the organization, across their matrix. And it's going to boil down to the strength of those relationships, the ability to communicate.
Yeah, I agree. And that's where I've seen it sort of fall apart. That's where I've had relationships fall apart is either I was trying to say what I thought they wanted to hear, or quite frankly, I wasn't listening closely enough and just missed it. Right? I was on my own path and maybe wrongly trying to convince them of, well, what you really need is X, Y, and Z. The shift for me as I became more accountable for these larger endeavors, larger accounts, was making sure that I understood really what it was that they needed. Because as long as I understood what let's say the stakeholders, what they were wanting, what was most important to them, what were their challenges outside sort of this perceived challenge of working with us at a studio, if that were one of their challenges, because it would so inform how we needed to shift that communication and maybe deepen that connection with them so that we could build that trust. Because I think that's the thing that kills so many different teams within a creative operations organization is once you lose the trust, then communication sometimes just ceases. And you can never get that trust back until you can begin to communicate again and hopefully connect. And just curious your thoughts on that, or if you have any.
I mean, I think you hit it. I mean, garnering trust, like getting people to believe that you are doing things in their best interests,
right,
or are there to partner to advance your whatever your shared goals are.
Yeah,
is a challenge sometimes,
yeah.
and sometimes you can't account for folks who don't want to participate or don't want to return the same level of trust building or
there's a sense
engagement
of to get that engagement. And one of the things that you hear a lot about these days is just vulnerable is the word that comes up. And when we were at Amazon together and we were in that studio, the genius of what they did to put that studio together in the beginning was they hired a lot of really good people, and I was honored to be a part of that. But also what came along with that is they hired a lot of good people with type A personalities who were always right in everything they had done before. And all of us had sharp elbows, certainly leadership with a couple of our, the one or two main clients. Mm-hmm. We had some folks on our team that had some sharp elbows and definite opinions. And, I think there were certainly times where communication started to fall apart. Yeah. And the hard lesson for me was, I think I just reached my wit's end and finally said to one of the other leaders that just said, I missed that. I messed up. I made the assumption that you wanted or needed or you were saying A, B, and C, when in fact, I think you were saying X, Y, and Z. And can you please help me understand? Because we all want to do well. We're not connecting on a certain level. There's some misunderstanding there. And things began to improve a little bit after that. Actually, things began to improve a lot after that.
Yeah.
But that connection is really critical. Is that something that I don't know, are you familiar with that at all?
For sure. And I think, in that situation and in other situations that I've seen, a lot of that comes down to fragmented leadership, like at a higher level, or getting mixed signals from leaders at different levels where the goals aren't, where you just don't have shared goals.
Yeah.
And your performance review is going to be judged on a different set of criteria than what their performance review is going to be judged on.
Right. We were talking about the journey, how you began at a gallery and then moving into Amazon and dealing with scale. What I want to continue on with is, your path there at Amazon, because you were at Amazon before I came in. We had our time together, and then after I left, you continue to move through that studio there. I'd love to hear about that, and then the transition to Nike.
Yeah, so when we were working together at Amazon, I was a digital imaging manager, and I was responsible for a lot of the technical, work in the studio, the digital department, the grip and light department, video editors in the studio, and then you had our photographers. After you left, the photographers joined my organization, and there were some other leadership changes at the time, and I took on more and more scope at the photo studio, and I had the opportunity to lead our inbound, outbound operations, our reporting department, our financial department, our production
That's
team.
A lot. That was a big studio with a lot of moving parts. I don't think I'd realized the entire scope and scale that you had taken on. But you went on to run the studio at multiple levels there for the last.
Not for very long, to be honest. It was maybe just under a year, and then Nike came calling, and so then pretty swiftly, we picked up sticks in New York and moved out west.
Yeah, and that was the point where Nike was going to really concentrate, put a lot of effort in focusing on the direct to consumer.
That's right. So back in 2016, there was a big push to grow the direct-to-consumer business. And as such, the powers that be saw that there was a need for a stronger in-house creative production outfit within the company.
Yeah.
And so we started about the work to build a brand new studio and to consolidate all the product photography that was happening across the the business.
Yeah, because
under one
before
organization.
the little bit that they were doing, it was done by an agency, an outside agency, right?
It's a mix. There was in-house studios and there was an agency. There were agencies. There were multiple agencies.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the goal was to, within a certain amount of time, bring everything or most everything back in house for PDP and
it was to bring it in house for the first time. It was all rooted on this idea of being able to scale and centralize operation or the photography process, so you could unlock like additional capability.
There's that theme that keeps coming up. Yeah.
Just to put it plainly, like they wanted to have all of their apparel on model. There was no, there was in the ways that they were working, they were not able to deliver on figure photography for every piece of clothing that was being sold on Nike.com.
There was a lot of mannequin or hollow body.
A lot of mannequin. There was a lot of hollow body. There was a lot of laydowns. There was due to a number of factors, but the most important one was cost. Was that at the time the cost per shot for the on figure work with the agencies was astronomical. And if you map that out across every SKU, it was a number that was higher than what the company was willing to put out. And so we set about the work to create the in-house studio. And over time, we onboarded all of the apparel photography, all of the footwear photography that was being done at the agencies, and we brought it in-house to our super studio in LA. And we successfully were able to produce all of the on-body photos and do it at a high quality, and we were able to increase the timely delivery of those assets for the business. So it was really successful. Through that process, we had built efficiency that was showing return on investment. We were saving money. And so the business started asking, what else could we do? And one of the things that they asked for was video. And so our teams, worked together to, establish, what the video process would be. And that took some trial and, some trial and error, to try and map or arrive to a video style guide or a look for video that was right for the brand, that could be done, at an acceptable cost, and an acceptable, time. And so, that first season, I think we were, do something like 50 videos a season. Just because, it was a slow process. We didn't understand exactly what the look and feel of the videos should be.
And are these videos for PDP or marketing or sort of both?
PDP.
Okay.
Yeah. And over time, you naturally kind of build some muscle, and you're able to move a little bit faster. The teams get used to producing the work, and you get some gains in efficiency, and you can do a few more products every day.
And was there some innovation?
But I think what's key at that point is to continue to scratch at it. Like even after you've reached the goal, like it's at a point we reached the target that we had set for ourselves. I think it was something like 200 videos a season. Okay. But we had to continue to ask, like, is this the best we can do? Are there things we can do to improve?
You're right.
Asking internally, like within our, asking our staff, asking each other as leaders, like,
that's right.
What can we do to make this better, more efficient?
And foreseeing what requests may come down. We've touched on that a little bit too.
Yeah, for sure.
Trying to, and again, back to this culture of innovation, trying to foresee what the possibilities are.
And one of the really cool things we did at the Nike studios, we had a research and development lab, in one of our smaller photo studios, where the team was able to work with and test different capture processes and technology.
Okay. So, Joe, you're not with Nike anymore. You recently departed there. I know you're thinking about what is next, and I'm just curious, like, what's got you curious and excited about moving on?
Yeah, thank you. So I I was at Nike for about 8 years, and before that, I was at Amazon for 7.5 years. So I've had kind of a long run at two very large, brands.
Yes.
With very, very large content production studios and studio networks.
Yeah.
And throughout that time, I was really working, to first of all understand kind of like what are all the end-to-end, processes in the studio and what are all the challenges that come across in a studio. But also thinking about how do we solve these problems and range of problems, and often coming to it through a lens of technology, innovation, creativity. What I'm looking to do now and what I've been doing recently is working with companies and studios to help them, improve their processes.
If the base of wisdom is simple pattern recognition, like you've been out, you've seen so much. AI is on the horizon. I think people are either really excited about it or terrified of it.
Yeah.
I think it's here to stay, and often people talk about it as it's just a tool, and that's the camp I tend to be in. I'm curious what your thoughts are on it.
Sure. I say we don't know what technology is coming down the pike. I mean, we've seen Gen AI and we've seen what's possible today. None of us really saw that coming in its own, in the way that it is 4 or 5 years ago.
Oh no.
But at the same time, we had CGI. We had computer animations. There was, things that happened in post-production. So,
well, I think that there's, a conversation that I would have with folks at Nike was behind closed doors. We would talk about AI, and my question would always be, how much are we considering it at this point? And the answer that I would get back is, well, define AI, because, is some people consider certain automations that are already built into Photoshop or any sort of back-end post-production or workflow process. If it's an automation, some folks consider that AI. And so that's a very small AI. But I think where everyone gets caught up, certainly in the creative world, is this larger, to your point, creating content from thin air. That's what they see. But in essence, there are several levels of AI that you can get into. And just curious your thoughts on that.
I think that's it, is using AI, using features in all of our tools, to enhance our process and to take away either repeatable, non-value added work, or to augment, scratch work, that we would otherwise be iterating on in our process.
Or testing new ideas and just to do that quicker with less pain points. And to get to those answers more quickly.
Totally, for sure. I'll just say one more thing about it is I welcome new technology that relieves me or my team from doing something when they could be doing something else. So I think the challenge for a lot of us then is to figure out what is that something else that I could be doing. Yeah.
Finding out where to put that valuable skill that your people have in the right place. Yeah. Or can that be managed by something else?
I mean, a robot did take my shoe photography job at Amazon.
Yeah, but I think you helped build that robot.
I did.
Yeah.
And I was glad for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, man, thanks for the time today.
Thank you.
I've been looking forward to this.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.